Greetings, everybody, and welcome to Glimpses, a SIFAT production. I'm Sarah Corson, and we are excited to have a little something new this go around. We're going to be doing a recording with my grandmother, Sarah Corson, with a live audience. So we hope that you enjoy this as much as we do tonight. For those of you who are new to SIFAT, we're a nonprofit mission organization that stands for Servants in Faith and Technology. We focus primarily on community development and poverty alleviation, and we've been around for 45 years. It was founded by my grandparents, Ken and Sarah Corson, who are here tonight. And they were pastors and missionaries in a lot of Central and South America. And they were sharing the living water with people, if you will. But as they were doing that, there were people who didn't have clean drinking water. And so they said, how can we help both meet that physical and the spiritual need? So they found like-minded people and they started SIFAT. And now that we have this going for, like we said, 45 years, we are able to share some of those stories tonight. Tonight we'll be looking at one of the first stories of their ministry. Shortly after they were married, they decided to move to Cuba, and that's where all of this started and where we're going to be tonight, where they had their first of many different revolutions that they have gone through dealing with Fidel Castro. So we hope that you enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you for coming this evening to hear my story. This story happened soon after Ken and I were married. And we went to Cuba as missionaries. And this was before Fidel Castro came to power. But he came to power while we were there. We had only been there, I guess 3 or 4 months when he won the revolution. And it was the first of several revolutions we've gone through because we work with the poor all over the world. In fact, SIFAT has graduates in 90-something different countries. And when the poor can't feed their children and get really, that's upsetting when you are so poor and as hard as you work, you can't feed them. And that's why many revolutions happen. And so we were in Cuba, and there was a little girl that lived with her great aunt near us. And her great aunt wasn't able to take care of her. She didn't want to take care of her, but she felt it was her duty. And the little girl would come and sit on our doorstep, just waiting for us to come home or go out, to just smile at her, to say a few words to her. She was lonely and dressed in rags. And we decided to adopt Isabel. And her great aunt was so happy to help us make that happen. And we weren't just sorry for her, we really loved her. She was 9 years old. And so she came to live with us, and they told us that now she was ours, even though they hadn't totally finished the last legal work, but they told us it was sure that she was ours now. And we loved her like our own daughter. But on Christmas Eve night, some of her relatives from the capital city came, and they were very anti-American. They didn't want Americans to have their niece, even though they didn't want her either, but they didn't want us to have her, and they took her away on Christmas Eve night. Now, right before that, we had a little pig that somebody had given us, and it was like a pet. We named it Rosita. And you know, that is a custom in Cuba. In Cuba, they don't, or they didn't back then, they didn't give Christmas presents, but they would wait till Three Kings Day and put their shoes out and put some food in the shoes and some hay for the Three Kings Campbells. And the Three Kings would usually leave an orange or something for them for Christmas. And for the poor, the kids were glad to get that fruit. Well, the ones that could afford it would have what they called lechon asado. That was a whole roast pig, a whole pig. And usually small ones, maybe it was about a yard or a little more long. And they'd roast them whole with a lot of spices, and they really were good. And they would eat it at midnight on Christmas Eve because it was their belief that Jesus was born at midnight. And so they were celebrating that by eating that little pig. And the poor never could afford to buy a whole pig, you know. And we didn't think about it. We didn't plan to kill Rosita. But on Christmas Eve, Isabel said, "When are we going to kill Rosita? Kill our little pig?" "Yes," she said. "I've never had a roast pig in my life for Christmas. We've never had one." And all my friends in school, they did. And I thought, now I'll get to have a roast pig. Now that I have a mommy and a daddy here. Oh, we thought we've got to do it for her. We were not going to buy presents like Christmas because we didn't want to introduce the commercial idea of America, of the United States to her. But we were going, we must do this for her. So we called the village meat market, the man, the butcher that had the oven, a big brick oven that he built a fire in and roasted the whole pigs. And he came, took Rosita and dressed her and cooked her, baked her all afternoon. He was going to be baking her. And Isabel was so excited. She helped me get the other dishes ready, and I washed her hair. And you know, back then, this was 1958. Yeah, back then we rolled our hair on bobby pins, and we'd stick these bobby pins in the little rolls we made. I put her hair up like that, and we were all getting excited to have Christmas Eve night together. And that's when her uncles came and took her away. I didn't see her for many years after that. The last thing I remembered was them picking her up and taking her away, and her screaming and crying because, you know, she wanted to stay. And we were heartbroken. It just broke our heart to lose our little girl. We didn't have other children then, and she was all we had. And just after that, the butcher came and knocked at the door and said, "Here is your lechon ready to eat." Big platter that filled the whole center of the table. And I looked at that. I said, "Ken, I cannot eat one bite of it. If we could only get it to her." But they had taken her away to the capital city, and they didn't tell us where. We couldn't find her. And we sat there and looked at that roast pig and just cried. And Ken said, "Wait, just wait, I'll be back." And he took off in the car. He went all over our little town of Santa Barbara looking for lonely people. He found a man in the bar that was drinking himself into oblivion just so he wouldn't have to remember that his wife had left him. And he said, come on, don't drink, come with us and celebrate the birth of Jesus. And he was happy to do anything to forget. He came, got in the car with Ken. Ken found a widow with 3 children. They didn't have their father, they didn't have a pig. And they were happy to come and eat with us too. He found all kinds of people that were lonely and alone on Christmas Eve. And I didn't know where he had gone. And suddenly he was back, and everybody, that car was packed, and some were hanging on the back of the car, outside hanging on it. They all came pouring in. I didn't have time to think about my problem. I had to think about them. And Ken introduced them all to me. He had met them, and I realized all of them were hurting too. And so we sang Christmas carols. Ken read the Christmas story from the Bible, and we had really good fellowship. And at midnight, we all got up and ate, and afterward they all helped me clean, and everything was cleaned up. And do you know, they left, but it was in the wee hours of the morning, and everybody felt better because we had shared our loneliness. We learned then that when we share our suffering and our loneliness with others, it takes away part of the pain. So we had to accept the fact Isabel was gone. We went to bed very tired, so we really could sleep. And the next morning, Christmas morning, we woke up, and that's, I've lived overseas a good bit of my life in our ministry, and I've missed my home, but I haven't really been homesick in a way that I really felt bad, because I was so involved in doing what I knew the Lord had sent me to do there. And this Christmas morning was different. I was so homesick, I didn't think I could get up and face the world. I woke up and I thought about my parents, my brothers. They would all this morning be following our customs. And our customs include giving presents, opening presents on Christmas morning. Ken and I had decided not to do that for Isabel's sake, and also because our salary was so small, we really didn't have extra money to spend. But I just put my head in the pillow, my face in the pillow, so that Ken wouldn't see me crying, but he understood. He got up and made us some hot chocolate, and he said, Sarah, come on. This is Christmas morning. Let's see what's going to happen today. And I got up feeling so homesick and sat down to drink the hot chocolate. And Ken said, come, let's look at the Christmas tree. Well, the church had a Christmas tree, and we lived in an apartment in the back of the church because Ken was the pastor. And it was just one door between our living room and the Christmas tree right inside the church. For their program, they had one. So he opened the door and he said, let's see if there are any presents. And I said, Ken, there are no presents. We agreed not to buy any presents this year. But he opened the door and there was one little present under the tree. And Ken said, old Santa Claus has come. And he had not kept that agreement we had. He had bought me a little tin measuring cup because he had heard me say I forgot to bring one when we came, and I can't really bake well without a measuring cup. And this little tin measuring cup cost 15 cents. And that was the last 15 cents he had. But it was a present that I really needed. And you know, in my whole life since then, it's been 66 years this Christmas since that happened. That's how long Ken and I have been married. And I have never received a Christmas present that meant as much to me as that little tin measuring cup. And we learned then we do need to participate in other people's customs, especially those we are serving and living with. But we don't have to give up all of our own either, because we still need to be who we are and know our roots, you know. So anyway, that ended up being a good Christmas, even though a sad one for us. And after that, we kept hunting for Isabel, and we couldn't find her anywhere. And Ken got very sick, almost died in Cuba, and we had to come home. And then the revolution, and Fidel Castro came, and he brought communism to Cuba, and things just turned upside down for us. And we came home and thought we would never see her again on this earth. When we would hear about Cubans coming across on inner tubes or any kind of boat they could make to escape Cuba after Castro came, we'd go to Miami and go down to where the refugees lived and ask, has anybody heard of a little girl named Isabel Mayor? And no one had ever heard of her. And we finally gave up and thought, well, we did find her cousin, and we kept writing her, asking her, and her cousin kept saying, don't worry about her, she's all right, she's studying. But we knew what she was studying because Castro closed the whole schools of Cuba for a year to teach the teachers how to brainwash the children to believe there was no God. And they had very devious means of teaching them that, so that children wouldn't know any difference. And so years passed, and all we could do was pray for her every night when I'd put my own children to bed. Thank God he gave me 4 more children. And that eased the pains somehow, but still there was Isabel in our hearts. And we'd always pray for her and hope that she wasn't believing the things that Castro was teaching in those schools. But the years passed, and in 1991, our conference of our church wanted to send a representative from our church to Cuba, and they asked us to go. The bishop asked us to go because by then things had loosened a little bit, and there were only 3 groups of people that could go, and they were students who were studying Cuba and people who went for medical reasons because Castro had a great medical system, and journalist. And you know, SIFAT, we had SIFAT by then, and SIFAT published a little tabloid for 20 years called The Provoker, and the bishop said, "You are journalists because you send out this little publication 4 times a year." And using that, we went and got a chance to go back to Cuba. 1991 had been a long time since 1958 when we last saw Isabel. And I just prayed, if it were God's will, to please help us find her. Well, we got there, 2 weeks we stayed, and the bishop of our church down there received us, and we got many wonderful surprises, which I could tell you if we stayed here a long time, how the church was so strong under communism, stronger than it was before communism came, because the people that were not really dedicated, they left the church quickly when they had to suffer for it. And the ones that stayed were the ones that really loved Jesus. And so the church just became stronger than ever. In fact, stronger than most American churches. I asked the bishop, would you like for us to send you some Sunday school literature or things like that? Because they were teaching out of a Sunday school book from the 1950s, and here it was in the 90s, but they didn't have any others. They were very poor because of the embargo that didn't let people trade with them. And so the bishop said, oh, please don't send us your Sunday school literature. We are people who have risked our lives for the gospel, and your literature wouldn't have very much to say to us. And he was right, because they were deeply Christian and ready to die for Jesus at any minute. And the bishop tried to help us find her. And we made phone calls, even went down to the island off the coast of Cuba we had lived on with her, the Isle of Pines. Nobody knew where she was, except one person said, she's in Havana somewhere, in the capital, but we don't know her address. And that's a huge capital city. How would we ever find her? And one of them said, my sister would know, and she lives in Havana, but all the phones have been out for 6 months. We haven't had any phone service, so I can't call my sister. So we gave up, and that night we packed. We had to leave at 5 o'clock the next morning, and we were going home, thinking we wouldn't see her. And we heard somebody right outside our door talking to the receptionist in the church and said, is there an American couple here who's looking for a girl named Isabel? And I jumped up quick and I ran out and I said, yes, we're here. And she said, well, my phone's been broken for 6 months, but this morning they fixed it. And my sister from the Isle of Pines called and told me to come to this church, that you were sleeping here and that you wanted to see her. And I was so thrilled, but we only had that one evening because our plane left at 5 in the morning. And she said, she lives on the other side of Havana. You'll have to get a taxi. But the taxis were few and far between there. They were mixed with the horse and buggies, and because Cuba was very poor during that time. They didn't have a way to trade, or they were really in bad shape. And the bishop said, there's one or two taxis over where a certain place where a lot of European tourists come. And he said, you might go there and try. Well, the one taxi they had was available, and the man would take us at a high price, but we were ready to pay it to see her. And we got in, and the lady that was her aunt that was with us, she said, this is the way, and it took us way to the other side of Havana. And then she said, stop here. She lives in that upstairs apartment. Well, suddenly my knees got so weak, I thought, I can't climb this stairs, because she has been 32 years without any contact with us. Maybe she's forgotten us, or maybe she hates Americans, because maybe Castro has, taught her so many things in his schools that she hates Americans. And it would hurt so much to see her if she had turned totally against us like that, and against God. But I just prayed, holding my breath, and Ken and I walked up those steps. We got to her apartment, knocked on the door, and she opened the door. And I wouldn't know her anywhere, even though she was wrinkled from a lot of hard work and lack of food. And she was 32 years older than she was 9 when we last saw her. And she took one look at us, and she said, Mommy, Poppy. She recognized us too, and she grabbed us and hugged us. And I said, thank God we found you. And she stopped and looked and said, God, oh yes, now I remember, God. She had not heard the name of God in 32 years, since she was 9 years old. But she welcomed the remembering. It was just, nobody had ever spoken his name to her. It was against the law in Cuba to speak the name of God outside of a church. And you couldn't invite people to church. Only the people that had been going could keep going there. And it was wonderful. 25 minutes we got to spend with her. And then the taxi driver said, I'm going. I'm leaving. If you're going with me, come on. And we had to go. We had no other way to get back to the plane. But at least we got addresses, and we were able to, we were in contact and could write. And so even eventually, she got a visa to come to the States because her sister in Miami was dying, and she got a visa to come see her. Then she got a bus and came on up and saw us, and I was able to talk to her, spend the whole night sitting up telling her about the God that meant so much to me, that she had grown up not being able to know anything about. And she was very happy to hear all of that. And she believed me, everything I said. And we had that chance together to spend 3 or 4 days. She went to church with me. It was a wonderful time. And, you know, it's Christmas time. And I want to close this by reading a poem. And this poem, some of you I know have heard it, by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. And it says, it talks, well, about peace on earth. And today, we look around and we don't see peace on earth. Today we look around and we think of the children in Gaza that have lost their parents, that are hungry. We think of the people in the Ukraine who have lost family members. And we think of many people that we know. One of my friends in Woodland just lost her son a couple of days ago. Suddenly, a shock. And we have a lot of problems. And we don't know about the future, what it will be. But do you know, God is in control. And when we lost Isabel, we thought we would never see her again. But we did. It took 32 years. It may take longer for our friend to see her son again because he's already in heaven. But someday she will be there too. She's a Christian. You know, as much bad as we see, and how we see the world is just crumbling around us sometimes. But God knows what's happening. He is still in control. And it took 32 years for us to realize that we could see our daughter again. And it may take 1 year, it may take the rest of our life. We may be in heaven before we ever see the peace that we want to see. But it will come. It will come. And the poem says, I heard the bells on Christmas Day. Their old familiar carols play, and wild and sweet the words repeat of peace on earth, goodwill to men. But in despair I bowed my head. There is no peace on earth, I said, for hate is strong and mocks the song of peace on earth, goodwill to men. But then peal the bells more loud and deep. God is not dead, nor does he sleep. The wrong shall fail, the right will prevail, and there will be peace on earth, goodwill to men.